I think I'm going to deviate a little bit from our normal class structure where we discuss verses from our sacred texts. My friends sometimes send me snippets of lectures or things they find on social media that they think I might be interested in. And so one of my friends, Kumi, sent me this clip of Neil deGrasse Tyson yesterday. He's a popular astrophysicist who studied at Harvard University, is in charge of the Hayden Planetarium, and was affiliated with Princeton. He's a well-respected academic in the field of astrophysics, and more so than that, he's a charismatic speaker. And what he's, I think, most famous for is his popularizing of astrophysics for the masses. He speaks publicly. He speaks in layman's terms. He's well read, but he interfaces, does interviews, goes on talk shows, and that way he bridges the gap to some extent between academia and the rest of the world. Do you all know who he is? He's a very, very famous person. Very stately looking black gentleman, with a really commanding stage presence. And he's somewhat ubiquitous in the Western world. It's hard to be culturally plugged in and have not seen him doing his thing a number of times. So the clip was some lady, a talk show host, was asking him if he believed in God. And Neil deGrasse says, well, the traditional conception of God is that God is all good and all powerful. But when I look around the world and I see tsunamis killing 250,000 people in Sri Lanka or destroying Japan, and I see things like congenital heart defects in children, and I see earthquakes and unavoidable, naturally caused disasters, I can't help but notice that those things are incompatible with a God that is both all good and all powerful. Therefore, I reject the notion of an all powerful, all good God. And the lady was started applauding him, the audience started applauding. And my response to Kumi was, I said, it's amazing, though, how when you take an expert out of their field of expertise, they are profoundly stupid. Just earth-shatteringly stupid. But they keep all of their confidence from their field of expertise, and then they have it in other fields where they are so ignorant. It's astounding. And she laughed because she's heard me make this point a number of times, and she was just so surprised that such a well-read, well-respected professional academic like Neil deGrasse Tyson would just make such a poor argument. Let me just do a better job than he did of framing out his argument. so that we can fully deal with it. Neil deGrasse's argument is that, and he didn't say this, and I don't even think most of the audience followed it, but it sounded half-baked good what he said, and so they rolled with it. But his actual argument, if it was structured into a logical formula, it would go something like a syllogism. It would go something like, an all-good God would want to create the best of all possible worlds. An all-powerful God could create the best of all possible worlds. We do not live in the best of all possible worlds because of natural disasters. Therefore, God must either not be all good or all powerful. I'll just say it again. And although you might not exactly follow what I said, if I say it one or two more times, you should, because we, as human beings, with our massive prefrontal cortices and our incredible intellect, we think logically. Even if we're not trained in formal logic, we think logically. And when you find a logical syllogism, a simple one like all humans are mortal, and Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates must be mortal, we can spot that makes sense, that there's a major premise and a minor premise, and you crush them together, and it makes sense. So this one is just slightly more complicated. An all-good God would want to create the best of all possible worlds. I guess if you really want to be formal, you have to say God, a God or the God would have created the world. God is defined as the creator of the world. An all-good God would have wanted to create the best of all possible worlds, because an all-good God would only want the best. An all-powerful God could create the best of all possible worlds. So God, God as defined by most persons created the world. An all-good God would want to create the best of all possible worlds. An all-powerful God could do so. We do not live in the best of all possible worlds. Evidence for that is that there is suffering. Now, deGrasse seems like maybe he has, like a elementary school education in philosophy of religion, because at least he was able to distinguish between two kinds of suffering that are usually pointed out in these type of debates. And those would be mortal suffering, which would be when I slap Shooty, or when Shooty shoots me. You could theoretically argue that God has nothing to do with that scenario, because Shooty and me are responsible for what we do to each other. That's mortal evil. It's also called venial evil. But now I'm like, I got to remember that, so I'm going to go Google that later. And then you have natural evil, and we could swap out the word evil for suffering, because evil is such a loaded term, and so we just use suffering in lieu of evil. So there's mortal suffering, what we cause to each other, and then there is natural suffering, and that would be earthquakes or congenital heart defects that no one caused. And so deGrasse pointed out some natural causes of suffering, because the stuff between us can usually be troubleshot by just saying it's between the two of you. That's actually not true, because an all-good God would create the best of all possible worlds. The best of all possible worlds would have to be a world where you were not subjected to other people who would do terrible things to you, and God could intervene because he's all-powerful, but doesn't. Actually, to live in a world where thanks, man. to live in a world where God created a Lord of the Flies situation, where we were cut loose and allowed to wreak havoc on each other. That's not even a good parent. What to speak of a good creator of the cosmos? That'll get your kids taken away from you. So, although most people don't realize it, to say that we live in a world where Shooty can just pick up a gun and shoot me, that means that we're not dealing with an all-good, all-powerful God as well. So actually, even mortal evil is problematic for the idea of an all-good and all-powerful God, but most people aren't philosophically astute enough to notice that. deGrasse is one of them. And so, or perhaps he chose the more difficult argument to deal with in his mind, which was the problem of natural evil, natural suffering. And he gave congenital heart defects, he gave natural disasters, which are kind of the go-to for people who make these kind of arguments. And then, so God as conceived of, standardly, is the creator of the cosmos. An all-good God would want to create the best cosmos. An all-powerful God could. We do not live in the best of all possible worlds because we live in a world where there is unfair, undeserved, unnecessary suffering. Therefore, God must either not be all good or not be all powerful. That's his argument systematized, turned into a syllogism. Does anybody want to point out the flaw with deGrasse's argument? Do any of you see it? If you don't, we have a problem, because all of you ostensibly believe in God, and if you accept deGrasse's argument, you shouldn't. And if you can't respond to it, then you have blind faith, which is also extremely problematic and leads to all sorts of bad stuff. So it's kind of, if you believe in God, you have to be able to deal with critiques like this. And this one's easy. And so I'm trying to increase the pressure here for you guys. We got Jenny, we got Sean, we got Hitton, we got a few people. All right. Let's start with, Hitton had his hand up first. Let's start with him.
His argument does not leave any room for love. So he's saying that an all-good God would not create there wouldn't be any suffering that would happen. And my argument would be, for an all-good God would create the world, the best of all possibilities.
Give me a second. You struggling, right? Because you threw out this love word, but you didn't ground it. So you just introduced this new concept, haven't linked it at all to the debate, and now you're struggling to try to link that word up that you introduced because you're all excited. You said the word, but then you don't know how to link it up, and you feel yourself floundering, right? Okay, Sean, what do you got?
He's not taking into account the law of karma.
That's a pretty simple answer. That answer is better than your answer. Your answer is good, but you have to really own it, which you didn't do. That answer is clean and easy. Yeah? Did you hear what he said? Okay. He's not. I'm going to address both. Just spoiler alert. I will be addressing both because I think they both deserve to be addressed. And I'll deal with his first, but then I'll deal with a more complicated question, which is dealing with mortal evil. I'm going to deal with both of them because I think they both deserve to be addressed. And so even though he didn't make that strong of an argument, we're going to deal with his argument, and we're going to deal with a more sophisticated version of where he wants to be if he ever grows up and gets out of high school, and the kind of argument he should make. But actually, this whole line of argumentation is extremely poor. It's not a good argument for atheism. But anyway, let's just keep going. Yes?
Okay,
That's correct. He only did. But I pointed that out. He only did that. Okay, all right, good. And then Ryan, not Ryan. Ryan's over here. Sean? Oh, you already spoke. And then Shitty Purple Course. You always go first.
He hasn't taken into account, he's saying that an all-good God could create a perfect world, but he hasn't taken into account that maybe he has created a world like that somewhere, and that we should find out where that is.
Okay, so Shitty's saying there's heaven. And so heaven disproves this world. Not really. Let's say I had two families. One of my families I took very nice care of. The other family I tortured. What does that say about me? So the fact that God created a nice place as well as an evil place doesn't really make God sound good. He sounds like a colossal jerk. Sounds like we're no longer wondering whether God's all good and all powerful. He's all powerful. He's definitely not all good. Because he created a terrible place and a good place. So that argument by itself suffers from that. Ryan?
I read something that PowerPoint said something about balance, about when there's family.
Don't do the balance thing. So what you're really saying there is God is not all good. He's actually just kind of half evil and half good. And he's a bit of a Taoist God. There's a yin-yang thing going on. But the yang involves torturing children unnecessarily. And the yin's, I don't know, like apple pie. And so the suffering of the world's okay because God's not all good. He's actually neutral.
Not that he's neutral, but there's a lesson to be learned, like from all.
Okay, now the lesson to be learned. Okay, no, that's not what you said. You said balance. That's what you said. That led to what I said. Then you're trying to escape what I said, so then you ran over to Sean. But that's lame. Because if you wanted to echo what Sean said, you would have just said, I echo what Sean says. But you didn't do that. You tried to be new and fancy and say something different. And when that fell on its face, you then ran for cover over to Sean. Because we're talking. I'm watching you do it. You know what I mean? Like if we're like in a fight, and like I put my hands up and you like start punching yourself in the head. And I go, why are you punching yourself in the head? I'm not. I'm just like checking my ear. It's like, no, you're not. I have a video of it. I can show it. So you said balance. Balance leads to a not all good deity. Now you said there's some lesson to learn. That's like the Mysterium Tremendum. God kills children. We don't know why, but there must be a lesson behind it. I don't think that's a great argument. That's basically saying I don't have an answer, but I want to get out of jail free card. And then you ran over the law of karma, which is that's where you wanted to go. Once you got beat up on the other stuff, you should have just started there. Did you follow that? Okay. We're like, huh?
Are we getting close?
Well, no. I'm just going to say no, you didn't get close. No, I'm starting to make you guys pay for what you say. Like it started with Shooty Prabhu, who I love and honor and respect, but he stepped a little wrong, so he got slaughtered, and then you just, just like, you just flatlined. We'll say it one more time so we're all caught up. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the famous popular astrophysicist who has dedicated, a big chunk of his adult career to bridging the gap between lay people and specialists, decided to weigh in on philosophy of religion. And I found what he said to be just abysmally poor. And I made the point, I actually got this point from a Nobel laureate who said it's amazing how when you take an expert out of their field of expertise, they're just as dumb as the next guy. And I added to that, but they got the ego of someone who's really sharp in their field, but they think somehow that extends to all fields. Like someone who's a really good doctor all of a sudden wants to practice law and goes out in the courtroom and just, thinks because he's a doctor he should be able to practice law because he's expert in one field, so he should be an authority in all fields. And I took the trouble to systematize what deGrasse said, which was that God created the world, God's all good, God's all powerful, but there's evil in the world, and evil in the world disproves either God's goodness or God's power. I said a little better, the way I said it was, God is centrally defined, created the cosmos, and all good God would want to create the best cosmos, and all powerful God could create the best cosmos, we don't live in the best cosmos because of suffering. The most difficult to explain form of suffering is natural suffering because it wasn't caused even ostensibly by some other source. Therefore, the existence of natural suffering disproves either an all-powerful or an all-good God. Therefore, Neil deGrasse does not believe in a classically conceived of triple O God, omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipotent. Cue applause from the audience and a slack-jawed interviewer because she was just stunned with his brilliance. And then we looked at solutions to this. And so one solution we got was that love exists, but we don't know what that has to do with what we're talking about, but love exists, okay? Seems like, like, for like, what's 2 + 2? And you're like, the sky is blue. And we're like, how does that answer my question? All right, because you got to link it. And then Sean said, well, we've got karma. He didn't define it, but we all know what that means. It means when a child is born with a congenital heart defect, it deserved it. Or let's just go even bigger. When a child is molested, they deserved it. You follow? Because they couldn't do anything to stop it. And so whatever happens to you, deserve. That's a tough philosophy to own, isn't it? Yeah. But you made that argument. And then Shruti Prabhu said, well, God created heaven, so there's a better place. But without linking that to anything else, we're left thinking God is completely erratic. And on one hand, he's creating heaven. On the other hand, he's creating hell. And why even believe in such a God? Why not just get rid of both? Jenny pointed out, hey, let's deal with both mortal suffering as well as natural suffering. Let's deal with the crimes people commit against each other as well as things that are happening by nature. Good. And then Ryan just kind of face planted several times and then ran for cover behind Sean. That's my assessment of what we've done so far.
Yeah, I really want to say something now.
Ganga wants to jump in.
No, I'm like, okay, it sounds like you're ready to cut my head off as well. I'm thinking that all that suffering is human and it's all judgmental and it's maybe outside of God. But the God is something you cannot really cut into particles like this person. I actually don't know the scientist. His mind likes to do. So it really comes from a lack of proof. It comes from not having any experiences. So I see how he can.
If you say he doesn't have any experience with God, what you're saying is, I don't have an answer to your question, but I'm better than you are. So la la la.
Well,
Stop. I'm gonna talk now. If you say he doesn't have any experience, that's invoking the I don't have an answer, but I'm better than you. Because I have experience, you don't have experience, therefore I have faith, you don't have faith. It's not a very good argument because it's not objective in any way, shape, or form, and it's an appeal to authority. But why should he accept you as an authority? If he accepted you as an authority, he'd already believe in God. He obviously doesn't accept you as an authority, so say you don't have any experience, but I do, it's like, you can't really do anything with that. Now, if you say it's judgmental, I don't know. I mean, the argument he's making is that there's earthquakes and a bunch of babies who didn't deserve it are being killed, like 250,000 people. And an all-good God wouldn't want 250,000 people to die unnecessarily in an earthquake or a flood or a tsunami. And an all-powerful God could stop that from happening. It doesn't seem like a judgment. It seems like he's looking at the world, noticing inadequacies in the world, and then reflecting on what that says about the nature of God. And his conclusion is maybe God exists, but it's not all good or not all powerful. That doesn't seem judgmental to me. At least on the surface, without any counter, it does pass muster and make sense. I framed it out as a logical argument. I turned it into math with words. I gave you guys all of his premises and the conclusion, which naturally flows from the premises. There's no real way to deal with this without attacking his premises. All men are human. All humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. You can't attack Socrates is immortal because it comes automatically from the premises. You have to attack the premises. Either all humans aren't mortal or Socrates isn't a human. You have to attack the premises because the logic holds. God is standardly defined, created the cosmos. Do we all agree to that? Yes, we do. An all-good God would want to create the best of all possible worlds. Is that true? Yes, of course it is. An all-powerful God could create the best of all possible worlds. Is that true? Yes, it also is. This world is not the best of all possible worlds. That's the only one we can argue. Now, this world's not the best of all possible worlds. Well, he's giving us evidence for why this world isn't the best of all possible worlds. It's like a sub-argument. It's like a sub-category of his argument. And that is that there is natural suffering in the world that's not required. That's what you have to attack. The initial premises aren't attackable. That's the premise that can be attacked. Do we live in the best of all possible worlds? Are you guys following this? If people are like, hey, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, and therefore pigs are pink. Are pigs pink? Yes. Does pigs being pink derive from the first two premises? No. Therefore, it's illogical. You follow? You can also say pigs can fly. Pigs can't fly. It also doesn't derive from the premises, so it doesn't matter. You follow? But if you don't like the conclusion, if somebody's logic isn't faulty, and you don't like their conclusion, you have to deal with their premises. And he didn't state his premises. He just said, when I see stuff going on in this world, it's not compatible with an all-good, all-powerful God. He didn't bother to explain it. They were what's called unstated premises, implied premises. I took the trouble to explain his premises. Now you have his premises in front of you. That's the only thing you can attack. Can we attack that God created the world? No, we can't. An all-good God would want to create the best of all possible worlds? Can't attack that one. An all-powerful God could create the best of all possible worlds? Can't attack that one. The only one we can attack is we don't live in the best of all possible worlds. And then we have to argue that we do live in the best of all possible worlds. You following this? That's the one we can attack. It's not judgmental. It's not from a lack of experience. He's looking at the world. And if you experience God, like let's say Krishna appears before you. Let's say you've seen Krishna. What does that have to do with our argument? We're not talking about whether Krishna exists. We're talking about whether he's all good and all powerful. If you've seen Krishna and you can't answer how we live in the best of all possible worlds, then you've seen a person who's either not all powerful or not all good. This is like it's a propositional argument. It's a tight proposition. It has to be dealt with. If you can't follow it, okay. It requires a certain... I've tried to slow it down and simplify it, but it's... You know, if you've never systematically, if you've never thought critically, or you never studied formal logic, or you never studied syllogisms or logical proofs, and and I'm speaking too fast, maybe I missed it. But otherwise, this is important stuff. Rupanugaji, you want to comment? You listened on the way over, right?
I did. I don't think I can articulate. I don't have the time to do that. But do you want me to say something?
I 100% want you to speak. 100%.
I'll join the God, the group that has been chastised.
By the way, I'm well aware that if I was to sit down with you and pick your brains for an hour, you would come up with a bunch of brilliant stuff. However, we're having a class, which means you get one shot. Like I'll stand in front of you and you get to throw that baseball at me, and if you hit the thing, I go in the water. But if you don't get it, then your turn is over and you get mocked. That's the way it works. So the class can move forward. Not because you've now represented the entirety of your belief system in 30 seconds. I see you, but he's talking first. Yes, Prabhuji. And by the way, I'm not expecting that you're going to fail. I'm expecting that we're now going to turn the corner and you're going to start to make some cogent arguments.
That's no question. Law of karma has been said already. Second, law of karma and reincarnation. Put these two together. I'd like to hear more from you.
Would you like to flesh out that argument a little more? I'm like, I mean, you're on to something.
No, please.
Okay. And then Ryan, he said the law of karma combined with reincarnation solves the problem. So he took karma, added reincarnation to it, which you were assuming, and he was saying that solves the problem.
I would say that suffering is an intrinsic facet of material existence. And so for a material world, this is the best possible material world that could be created and provided a means to transcend the suffering of it.
Suffering is an irremovable facet of material existence. Therefore, given that suffering is necessary and has to be there in the material world, you haven't explained why, but okay. This is the best of all possible worlds. The question would then become one of two. Question A, why did God create the material world in the first place then? So you just created a new question. You didn't solve the problem at all. And it's a problem because we're not getting anywhere. You follow? You haven't gotten us any purchase. You haven't gotten us any ground. We haven't gained any ground. You get it? And you sound dumb because you didn't anticipate that it was just going to lead to another question with no solution whatsoever. And now you lose your authority because you can't even notice that you haven't said anything relevant. Option two, somebody could say to you, why does the material world have to include suffering? And then, and now it's like, yeah, why? How come you would just introduce that without giving evidence for that? Do you follow this? I know what you want to say, but you have to say it right. Otherwise, it doesn't count. Does that make sense? Yes. And what we're having here is you won't get chances with people in real life. People talk to you, and if you can't make sense, they'll think you're an idiot. They'll lose faith in Krishna. They'll walk away. They'll feel emboldened, and you'll have lost an opportunity to have some kind of a valuable exchange with somebody. And so we have to sharpen ourselves. So when we come across people like this in the world, we can answer coherently and swiftly, and we can say stuff in a way where we make no mistakes, where we answer more questions than we create, where we solve the problem, where we get the applause instead of the atheist. And it's an art form, and you got to practice it. And you guys are out of practice, with the exception of Rupa Nugaji, because he gave a minimalist answer, and also Sean. They both gave minimalist answers, but there was nothing wrong with their answer. Super minimalist, but there was nothing wrong with it. You might have created another question, but you didn't say anything which was lost you momentum. You actually started getting momentum, and you added to what he said. So you guys are good. Anybody else? Bailey and Dhruv. Dhruv is going to nail it, by the way. Dhruv's going to nail it. Dhruv's going to win. Bailey's not. But maybe Bailey will. Bailey's been hanging out with Dhruv. Let's see what happens.
So I'll start with love. So would love exist in the best of all possible worlds? Yes.
Ajay Prabhu, please sit here.
Yes, it will, because a world of love is better than a world without.
Hold on. Slow down and speak even louder. Because otherwise I have to repeat everything you say. So just imagine you're speaking to everybody.
Okay. With the best of all possible worlds.
You actually didn't increase your volume at all. You just took a weird breath. So what I'd like you to do now is actually increase your volume.
With the best possible.
Still didn't increase your volume. Just talk loud like I am.
Will the best possible of all the worlds have love? Yes, because a world without love is not as good as a world with love. Love necessitates free will. So God has to give up some of his power in order to give you free will. With that free will, you can turn towards him in love, or you can turn away from him. He gives you that option. If you decide to turn away from him, you have to be distracted almost fully by his.
Stop. You lost it there. You were perfect up till there. You have to be distracted almost fully. That wasn't the point you wanted to make.
No, it wasn't.
The point you wanted to make was if you turn away, that is the beginning of suffering. Suffering is therefore created by you. That's what you were trying to say. Good. All right, that's a good argument. He just rejuvenated your love argument, right? You have to actually say it like that. There's really two angles here. So I'm going to cover both of them. Your love argument is now back on the table. Your karma argument is still on the table. Your karma/reincarnation argument is still on the table. So I'm going to do it now. Anybody? Oh, Drew, yes. And talk loud. That was not loud. And don't make me ask you again.
Starting where he left off, a world in which you need to have free will to either turn towards God or turn away from God. When you turn away from God, that is the start of suffering. That sort of covers the moral suffering side, where people turn away from God, God is all good, therefore turning away from God means doing things that are not good or not in line with divinity, and therefore suffering and evil is created. The other line kind of moves towards karma and reincarnation. A world in which you only have one chance to commune with the divine.
No, don't go down that road. It's a decent road, but you don't have to go down that road. I mean, it's not bad, but then the other line would be natural suffering is then created over a significant period of time. It appears to be natural, but it's actually the fruit of what you've done in the past. Then you can make that argument. You follow that? Good. A little awkward. You felt it, right? You were stumbling a little bit, right? But you have all the points, and you had them in order. So that's a win. So Sean, Rupanugaji, Bailey, Drew won the day. I'm just going to put what they said together. Maybe add a few bells and whistles. Anybody else? Okay, here we go, guys, with the time we have left. The first thing I would say is this. I would say to Mr. Tyson, or if we're, friends, I'll call him Neil. I would say, hey, let me get this straight, Neil. If I can explain to you how an all-good, all-powerful God is congruent with the suffering you see in the world now, you'll believe in God. You've presented an argument. It's your primary argument. It's your go-to argument for why you don't believe in an all-good, all-powerful God. Therefore, it means you think it's the strongest evidence. And if I'm able to solve this problem for you, you're able to believe in God. At which point he'd say no, and I'd say, well, then let's talk about your real argument. He'd say, I don't think there's any evidence for God. And I'd say, okay, let me give you some evidence for God, and we'll talk about God's nature later. But if someone wants to make this argument, the argument from suffering for you, they're saying, if you can explain to me that an all-good, all-powerful God is compatible with the world in which we live, if you can show that, I'm ready to become a believer. And I'm unwilling to get into this conversation with somebody if they're not willing to let this be the debate. Because if I win this conversation and then you go, well, I don't see any proof for God's existence. God would create the world with love. Well, I don't think there is a God. I don't think there is a creator. I think the world was created by chance from a big bang with, abiogenesis, life from chemicals. And I believe that physics rules chemistry, and chemistry rules biology, and biology gives rise to consciousness. If they were to say that, then why are we arguing about the nature of God and the incompatibility of the nature of God with the world in which we live? If you want to link yourself to the argument of suffering, we've won the debate. You're forced to become a believer. I just have to give you an answer to this last question. We've gotten rid of all the other debates about whether it's a blind watchmaker, whether we can explain the existence of the world without reference to a deity, whether it becomes an unnecessary thing. You follow? We're like at a very advanced level. And if somebody's at that advanced level with me, having an intermediate level argument, I want to make sure they don't ever go back from that argument. Did you follow this? It's like if you want to sell somebody a car, and they're like, I don't know, are carpets included with the car? And you're like, wait a second, hold on, stop the show. You're saying the price we've set, the car we're talking about, the purchase agreement, the loan agreement, whatever, everything is squared away. All you need is carpet. If somebody makes this argument to me, I'm giddy. Because it's like a 5-minute solution. We're done. Less than 5 minutes. I'll do it in 3 minutes. It's important that you understand this, because the moment you answer this question effectively, the person is now going to retreat back to, well, I don't see any evidence. I don't believe in like, there needs to be, that God created the world at all. And so you're saying he would have done this or would have done that, but I don't believe he did do that. I don't believe there is a creator. You follow this, Rupanagaji? So it is absolutely critical. If you get someone making this argument, you are so close. You got to trap them. Like a good salesperson. Let me get this straight, sir. You're saying if I include the carpets for free, you're ready to buy the car. That's what we're debating over right now. You follow? It's incredibly important to keep that in mind. All right, because we're at an advanced level argument now. There's just one problem in believing in all good, all powerful God. You find plenty of evidence, it's a reasonable proposition, it's a reasonable hypothesis, but there's just this one problem. And it's the major one. It's the big one. It's the one you say on TV that gets you applause. Okay. Here we go. We live in the best of all possible worlds. The best of all possible worlds would be a world where we had free will. So we could choose to, among other things, love each other, which requires free will. Love must be given freely. Therefore, we live in a world where we have significant free will such that we can choose to love. If we choose to love, we can also choose not to love. You following this? It's a very important point. You should say it just like that. I wouldn't introduce love as critical. I would introduce something that's even less arguable. We live in a world where we have significant free will. We can make decision D at time T without any force controlling said decision. We can commit act A at time T without any other force determining our action. Therefore, we have significant free will. Action A means any action. Decision D means any decision. At time T means at any time. We have significant free will. We may not have absolute free will, but we have significant free will. See why I said significant instead of absolute? Okay, good. And that free will allows us to do things like love. And a universe with love is better than a universe without love. If someone wants to argue that point with you, that's another happy day. Because then you can say, let me get this straight. If I can win this point, you're going to accept it? Great. A universe with the possibility of love is better than a universe without the possibility of love. But to have love, there has to be free will. Rocks don't love each other. Chemicals don't love each other. Living entities endowed with free will and consciousness choose to love each other. Therefore, if God created the world, and all good God would want to create a world with the possibility of love, that would require giving free will. That would mean that God's omnipotence is soft, because its omnipotence, save and except for, God does not get in the way of your free will. We live in a world where such free will exists. Therefore, the free will makes sense. And an all good God would give us free will so we could choose to love him. A consequence of that is that there's a possibility of turning away from divinity, of turning away from love. And therefore we become the birthplace of suffering, or you could call it evil. If you have free will, you could choose to do the wrong thing. If you choose to do the wrong thing, it's on you, it's not on God. God's a good guy because he gave you the ability to love, but the consequence of that was there's a possibility of you doing the wrong thing because you have free will. Free will means you can do the right thing or the wrong thing, and now the wrong thing becomes a necessary consequence of the best of all possible worlds, which includes the possibility of love and which necessitates free will. Therefore, a universe that has the possibility of love and the concomitant free will to have that possibility of love is better than a world without the possibility of love, with no free will, and therefore with no possibility of suffering or evil. If we have to compare, on one hand you have a world without the possibility of love, but there's no possibility of suffering. On the other hand, you have the world with the possibility of love, therefore free will, and it also has the possibility of suffering. This world is better than that world. You follow that? And if you want to debate that, great. I'm eager to have that argument. I'm eager to have that argument. A world with the possibility of love. And the evidence that you search after relationships and search after love and crave love is the proof of what I'm saying. We need to go no further than looking at your own experience of the world to prove the legitimacy of what I'm saying. Imagine a world without the possibility, the miracle of life and consciousness and the ability to love. A cold, dark, chemical world. Your living and having relationships is the proof you find such a world better. Otherwise, you just kill yourself. So, we live in the best of all possible worlds, which necessarily includes the possibility of bad stuff happening. But if that bad stuff was to happen and God was to let, Shuddhi Prabhu and Mahabala go at it and fight with each other and kill each other like Lord of the Flies, that would be a problem, because an all-good God wouldn't want them to hurt each other. Like, he wouldn't want Shuddhi to be able to hurt Mahabala in a way Mahabala didn't deserve or didn't choose. Right? An all-powerful God could create a world with free will, without letting people just run absolutely free, where they can torture and maim each other indiscriminately, even when people don't deserve it. Like, Mahabala didn't do anything. Shuddhi goes and attacks him. She's committed a crime. Why? Because Mahabala didn't deserve it. If Mahabala was robbing Shuddhi and Shuddhi fought back, it wouldn't be a crime, because he did something to warrant what Shuddhi did. But the law says he didn't do anything because he just attacked him, therefore it's a crime. It's assault. God couldn't let people just assault each other. So therefore he created a law of karma. And the law of karma means whatever happens to you, A, you deserve, and B, the other person who did it to you isn't a selfless actor. They are also a moral agent. Which means that if Mahabala punches Shuddhi, Shuddhi deserved to get punched, and Mahabala wanted to punch him. Therefore, Mahabala gets the karma for punching him. He is a moral agent who exercises free will. But God guided Mahabala to Shuddhi, who deserved to be punched. You follow this? Now Mahabala gets the karma for punching him, and Shuddhi equalizes his karma. Does that mean that if a child is, forgive me, a child is raped, that it means they deserved it? Yes. Because the only other answer is God is the most diabolical monster in the history of the universe. Because an all-powerful God that didn't stop it from happening is not all good. We live in a world with the law of karma. And the law of karma is what happens when you turn away from divinity. Divinity is still there. It's still controlling the universe. And it's matching up people with what they deserve. Whether you're a Jew, Christian, or Muslim. If you're not willing to commit that everything that happens to everybody is deserved by that person, the only other solution is that God is an evil monster who makes one person suffer unnecessarily and another not. If you had a child, and one child you let grow up healthy, and the other child you killed off or tortured, what does that say about you as a parent? The fact that you let one child live a healthy life proves you could do that, but you didn't do it for this child. It means you are biased, and you're discriminating, and you're bigoted, and you're hypocritical, and you're horrible, and you're evil. Unfortunately, the law of karma is the only worldview compatible with an all-good, all-powerful deity. And it's fully compatible. We live in a universe with a complicated algorithm where everything you do comes back to you. And whatever you do, the person you did it to deserves it. And you're still a moral agent. And they equalize their karma, and you create a new karma. And there's always an open door where you can turn towards divinity. And then these laws start to apply a lot less. And Krishna can get more directly involved in your life. But that's never forced, because then it wouldn't be love. And now I've come up with this incredibly hypothetical world. Oh, and natural karma is just over many lifetimes for a certain group of people who all live together because they all collectively deserve for that to happen. Could an all-powerful God have such an algorithm? Sure. Could he manage such an algorithm? Sure he could, effortlessly. Ekang stena stito jagat. By one fragment of myself, I maintain the whole cosmos. There's certainly nothing illogical about the possibility that an omnipotent, omniscient being could create a universe where everyone had free will, everyone was a moral agent, but they only interact with people who deserve to have those things happen to them, and Krishna managed to match up those people perfectly together with one another. So everyone's either getting their karma equalized or creating new karma for themselves. And then what we call natural evil is just collective karma with reincarnation over a time period. And what happens when you do stuff, instant karma, you jump off a building, you break your legs, that's instant karma. You smoke a pack a day for 20 years and you get cancer, that's more long-term karma. And you do some terrible things in this lifetime, they come back to haunt you in the next lifetime, that's long-term karma. If God did not create a world where you got the results of your actions, there'd be no impetus to learn, and that would be cruel. Like a parent who never gave significant learning opportunities to their children. Therefore, a law of karma is not only compatible with an all-good, all-powerful deity, it's necessary if you have an all-good, all-powerful deity. We live in a world which conceptually is completely congruent with an all-good, all-powerful deity. Reincarnation, karma, free will, the possibility of love, the natural ramifications of this, what it says about God's omnipotence, it all fits together like a hand in a glove. There's no problem. There's nothing that doesn't work in this. And I don't have to give any evidence for this. Because the argument was that these things are incompatible. Therefore, if I can just explain a worldview in which these things are compatible, I've won. You follow? This works the other way. Like if you say to an evolutionary biologist, if you say there's no way for the human eye to have evolved through random genetic mutation, and they map it out real quick on a computer model, how the human eye could have evolved by random genetic mutation at each step being beneficial to the organism, they don't have to give you any proof that's what happened. They just have to explain that it could have happened because you told them it was impossible that it could have happened. deGrasse's argument is that it's impossible that an all-good, all-powerful God could have created the world in which we live. I find just the opposite. We live in a beautiful world where we have free will. We're not forced to look towards divinity. God's not in our face. That would take away our free will. Therefore, love exists. We can turn towards divinity or not. But if you turn away, then there's another governing principle. So nothing bad happens to a person unnecessarily. And there's always a little bit of an impetus to learn as you start to recognize those patterns. But not so much that you're forced to learn. Therefore, you always still have free will. This world of suffering is perfectly congruent with an all-good, all-powerful deity dealing with living entities with free will who turn away from divinity, which is what all of us are. Did you guys follow that? That's the argument. And deGrasse just set himself up for just to get mowed down, like machine gun fire. And, even a good atheist knows this. Good atheists don't even make this argument. Sophisticated atheists don't even make this argument. It's a low-level argument with an easy answer, but you got to put it in order. You got to say it more or less just like I said it. Maybe you can improve on it, but you got to cross all those T's and dot all those I's and not cross your feet. You follow? Okay, feedback? Shri Prabhu.
Always have to look for the weakest premise and find what a solution.
We have to look for the premises, even if they're not stated. A good philosopher will tell you his premises so they're easy to attack. An unsophisticated thinker will just assume his premises and never tell you what they are, and just assume everybody thinks like he does. You have to learn to recognize the premises and attack the weak premise. Absolutely. Ganga.
I think it's really important for us also to learn how to arguments. And I've been in those situations many times, and I know already that I lost them when I go into my life, and I want to do something now that is already over. And I think I was really aware of
The examples from your life
yeah,
are excellent once you've done what I just did. Once you've done that, and their heart opens up, and they want you to take a page out of your book and share with them your testimonial. Testimonials are a very valuable part of advertising, but when you're dealing with a very, contentious topic like this, you have to start. If the person's making a logical argument, you got to give them a logical response. You can then give a more aesthetic response, a testimonial response, something from your heart, but you always want to do that after you've made this argument. Excellent. More. Yeah.
A more broad question about karma. Okay.
No.
Okay.
You had a broad question about karma. I'm looking for critiques of what I've said. Was there any mistake in what I said? Yes.
I wasn't going to say mistake, but I was just thinking about the free will is required for love. Is that what you were saying? Or did I-
That's 100% what I said 5 times for emphasis. Yes.
I'm just kind of having trouble grasping that.
So if somebody was forced to love you, you would call that love? You just answer your own question?
Because so animals are capable of love, right?
But are animals not capable? Animals have no free will? I mean, first of all, cats regularly eat their young. Cats will regularly have a litter of kittens, and then they'll eat the weakest 1 or 2 kittens amongst them. So, cats' experience of motherhood is vastly different than our own.
But they're still capable of love.
Let's go with cats are capable of love. Let's run with that one. Sure. So cats have some level of free will, such they can choose to love. It's less than yours, therefore they can love less profoundly than you can. No problem. Let's go ahead and stipulate to that. No sweat.
It's just the degree of free will is equivalent to the degree of love that's capable.
Absolutely. Wouldn't you agree?
Now
There you go. Great. Good. That was good. Yes.
I like how before you even got into a debate about it, you established something with them. If I can prove to you this, then you'll agree.
Otherwise we waste our time. Right? Otherwise you waste your time. People do this all the time. They say something, you deal with it, and then they're like, oh, well, what about this thing over here? And they say it's called moving the goalpost in debate. And you can't let people do that. So if they take a position where we're 99% of the way there, I make sure to lock them in at that 99%. So good. You noticed that. Incredibly important. Yes, what do you got, Tony?
I just like how we were able to cancel out the natural disasters from
By the way, I didn't just deal with natural disasters. I also dealt with a much more complicated problem of one person hurting another. And I also had to include that because an all-powerful God could include that. In fact, the law of karma is perfectly compatible with nobody getting anything but what they deserve. It feels painful, but it's the only way you can believe in an all-good, all-powerful God. Jews, Muslims, Christians, anybody who believes in God, all-good and all-powerful, has to ultimately come to this answer. Otherwise, God's a monster because he arbitrarily made someone suffer unnecessarily. So I dealt with the natural stuff, but I also dealt with people hurting each other and how that's compatible with an all-good, all-powerful God as well. More. Yes?
I have a question. So, when we have a law of karma, we don't necessarily remember from our prior life.
But I don't remember what I had for lunch last week. What to speak of last year. That doesn't mean I didn't have lunch. So, let's go a little further. I think forgetting is actually critical for free will. Because if I remembered everything I did wrong and could trace out exactly how every single thing I did caused me to suffer, I would not have free will. I'd be shackled by that. So even our forgetfulness is a blessing from God which preserves our free will. But we can at least understand enough about the principle to understand how it works and therefore benefit from it without having to become oppressive such that we have no free will. Also, God not being immediately in front of you. If God was immediately in front of you, there'd also be no free will. You'd be paralyzed. Like if your parents were watching you all the time, you wouldn't be able to do anything wrong. And so this God's absence in the world to some extent and also our forgetfulness are all perfectly compatible with, and actually I would even go further, necessary for an all-good and all-powerful God in a universe where we have significant free will. Notice I offered no evidence for anything because I wasn't required to. All I had to do was explain that it was logically compatible.
So in that context, that would mean I did something bad in my previous life, therefore I'm suffering. But God could forgive that suffering.
Yes.
So when I see the
Generally speaking, we say that part of what has to happen is that you have to go through whatever this body has. And so you have to grow old and die and whatever, and suffer whatever this body is destined to suffer. But that you will not experience that suffering to be the same. Because you will be able to see the value in it. You'll be able to accept it. You'll be able to gracefully move forward. And you'll be able to let go peacefully. Because you're experiencing the love of Krishna while you're going through what this material world has to offer. Therefore, you don't actually suffer. And what you really do is set an example for how someone in God conscious moves in the world and deals gracefully with the material world. And you're an inspiration for others, as Jesus was, for example. Follow that? Again, I have to offer no proof. I just have to explain how it's logical and reasonable. I have a lot of freedom. You follow? It's important when you're having a discussion to know what the parameters are. And when you go, well, there's no evidence for that. But you didn't ask me for evidence. You presented me with a propositional logical problem. And if I can explain in a propositional way how it's not a problem, I won. You follow? No evidence required. They require evidence. It's a whole other conversation. But you didn't want that because you made the argument you made. You guys follow that? We should all memorize such arguments. Make them our own and be able to repeat them in our sleep. We should make them our own, be able to give our own examples, do it in our own way with our own panache. But we are required to do this because an intelligent person will not have faith in God unless you can help them cross these bridges. We shouldn't just depend on talking to dumb people and blind people. We should be able to interact with intelligent people and answer their intelligent doubts. What bothered me was deGrasse was just so poorly read on the subject that he hadn't bothered to read the literature where, most religions in the world deal with this. He read real low-level stuff. And if he hadn't, he wouldn't have made the arguments he made because he would have seen that there's good answers to this. He would have picked some other argument. That's what's so disappointing. Was he was weighing in on philosophy of religion where he clearly had like a child's understanding of the subject. Had not read both sides of the argument. But as an astrophysicist, he was obliged to do that. And all of you are philosophers of religion because you believe in God. And therefore what attends to that is you have to be responsible to learn some of this stuff. You maybe don't have to be as loud as I am or as aggressive in your line of argumentation, but you have to learn the basic structure of these arguments. How else will you talk to anybody and answer their reasonable doubts? And when you meet somebody who's smart enough to have these kind of doubts, you should be joyous because it means they're smart enough to understand a good answer. It's like you found a really bright child and their future is extremely bright. They're a child. Neil deGrasse, when it comes to Tyson, when it comes to philosophy of religion, is a child. It's like a 12-year-old. It's not even like high school level. It's like junior high. A smart 10-year-old or 12-year-old or an average 13-year-old or 14-year-old. So we have to have, at least a high school, college level understanding of this stuff. We should practice it. We should try. We should fail. We should get comfortable. We should refine our game. Just like everything else in life that's worth doing, you get really good at it. Thank you very much. Let's do it.